The music over. Good evening, everyone. Welcome. My name is Marilyn Shannon, and this is my favorite show of the month, Through Their Eyes. I love this show, and I'm so delighted you're all here to join us. I want to just welcome all of you, tell you can put your name, a nickname, whatever you like under our video and join us in our chat. It's a live chat. You're welcome to ask questions and comment in there as well. And you can certainly call into the studio at 919-518-9773. We invite you to do that as well. And then also you can come in on Skype, and that would be at computers and then the number 2K voice. You'll come in on voice, not video, and we'd love to have you join us as well. The conversation gets so good, and we'd love to have you a part of it. And it goes into different things because there's so much to talk about, right? So let me go ahead and introduce Josh. Hey, Josh.
All right. Hey, everyone. So
Hey.
I'm Joshua, and I've been working as a host of this podcast now for the past couple of episodes. But for today's episode, we do have two brand new hosts, Rebecca and Danielle. So I want to introduce them. So starting with Rebecca, do you just want to give everyone like a brief summary about yourself?
Yeah, sure. Hi, I'm Rebecca. I am a recent graduate of Bishop's University, where I finished my undergraduate studies with a double major in psychology and business. And I am planning to continue on with my master's at Bishop's in psychology with a focus in sports psychology specifically.
All right. Thank you. And Danielle, if you're interested in introducing yourself.
Absolutely. Thanks, Josh. Hi, everyone. My name is Danielle, and I am currently a senior at UNC Chapel Hill, graduating on Sunday. So I'm so close to being done. I'm also double majoring in psychology and English, and my minor is in philosophy, and I'm very excited to be here. So thank you all for having me.
All right, thank you. So, going into the topic of today's episode with what we were talking about and actually transitioning from education, I wanted to ask you guys today if you could tell us a little bit about your opinions on education currently. Because in me thinking about it right now for adolescents and even people all the way at the university level, it's kind of hard to bridge the gap between careers and education. So, if either of you have any opinions to start off the conversation, what do you guys think might be right or wrong with how education currently works today?
Well, I have quite a few opinions on this. And as somebody who is currently living the university to workforce transition, I've recently joked with a lot of my friends about how I think that although school does a lot for us, and I think it does prepare us in a lot of different ways for the real world, if you would like to call it that, but I think school really teaches us just about everything except life, where we have all these great things that we're learning and different concepts we're learning, but then all of a sudden the gap between our college education and then entering into becoming young adults and having to function in society, there's just so much of a transitional gap and so many things that we're oftentimes unaware of in college is just our role as students. So I don't know if Rebecca would have anything to add on to that, also having graduated and is currently going to a master's program.
Yeah, I think a big part of university life specifically is one, the academics, but also two, the social aspect, because I think that's plays a big role in university and college and all of that. Especially when you're trying to figure out your own social circle, meeting new friends. For my personal experience, I was from Chicago going to university in a whole different country. I didn't know anyone from my high school that was going there, didn't know any other person that was attending. So a big part of university was like joining clubs to find people that I melded with and being able to participate in other extracurricular activities. Finding friends in my psychology and business classes was a big part of me enjoying my university experience.
Yeah, so Rebecca, I know you said you also just graduated, and Danielle talked about shifting from university into like workforce life. What do you guys think what is the most important thing that you've gotten from your current education that's helped you make that transition?
I think, especially, I've learned to work well with a whole bunch of different types of people, especially through group projects in university. And I think that will be very helpful in especially for my graduate studies, but also if you're going into the workforce, because you have to work with whoever's already there. So it's very important to be able to develop those interpersonal skills, to be able to work with anyone effectively.
Yeah, and actually adding on to that thought too, I've also felt like project-based learning or learning in like a group format has been the most like transferable skill that I've gotten from going through school in like middle and high school. So I've been when you think about like applications and actually doing something, do you guys think that things like the testing format system for education are kind of obsolete when it comes to teaching people like the current skills they need for specific jobs?
I think a lot of it is pretty obsolete at this point, and I've had huge gripes with standardized testing since high school, and specifically the ACT and SAT test scores to enter into a university. And from my understanding, there are a lot of universities, private and public, who are doing away with those entry level testings in order to get into college because it's not necessarily indicative of an individual's intelligence. It's indicative of how well you are at taking an exam or taking a test and how well you're able to retain certain amounts of information. But it really says little about their actualized intelligence. And I think that that's something that was very useful when the education system was being formed hundreds of years ago, when there were certain tasks that needed to be completed in certain ways. And so that knowledge was necessary because it wasn't accessible in other places. But now I think that it does very little to teach us how to be dynamic thinkers and how to be critical problem solvers. But it really encourages a culture in schools of retaining and dumping information rather than actually gaining knowledge and encoding it into your long-term memory. So I think that there's a huge, and I think recently, an awakening of this being something that needs to be reformed. And I'm hoping in years to come that we start to see that schools are shifting more away from that sort of testing and that kind of retaining and dumping culture.
So I have a question. I'm just going to jump right in here because I'm curious about the high school, Josh, what your experience is in high school, and also how do you see this changing, and what should change, and who makes the changes? I mean, how do we make these changes? So what's going on? What do you think about it in high school, Josh?
Yeah, so I definitely think so personally for me in a high school setting, dealing with the standardized testing model hasn't been as challenging for me as I know it really is for some people based off where their own aptitudes lie. But I do, so I'm in like an academy, which is like a sub part of my high school that focuses on teaching kids about more workforce related skills. And in that program, they very, very heavily focus on learning how to do group work. We have a project coming up right now where we have to present as if we're like in a business, presenting a business pitch, and it's meant to completely mimic a real world situation of a sales pitch. And I think that kind of teaching is really beneficial. But when it comes back to the basic academics, for any class like my biology classes, my math classes, it's just you memorize information and then you apply it. And I don't really even remember everything I studied for all my tests last semester. So, in terms of how I think high school could really be refined, the biggest issue I think right now is that at this age, it's really hard for kids to figure out what they want to pursue. Because if you absolutely know what you're gonna do when you grow up that early on, you can really focus towards it. Like, if you know you wanna be a construction worker when you grow up and you just wanna be the best construction worker, there's no reason to use 99% of the skills you learn in school. And from a success standpoint, ideally, you'd wanna go to almost an academy that focuses on teaching construction or doing electives that focus on, like, carpentry or building. But because that aptitude-based learning is so hard, because kids are still trying to figure out what they wanna do, I think an incorporation of more exploratory, like, studies would go a long way, especially because that's what electives are sort of marketed as. It's like a way for students to figure out what they wanna do, but when it comes to getting into, like, a good college or university, those classes end up mattering a lot more than just, "I get the opportunity to explore what I wanna do." So, in terms of how that change could be made, I guess for me, it would still be hard to figure it out. I understand that school has like limited time to teach things, but I do think certain high school graduation requirements regarding like the sciences or like history could be dropped depending on where the student wants to go with their life. Especially if you're going to go into like a STEM field, I think an interpretation of like history, for example, is not as important as focusing more on your math and science related subjects.
Yeah,
And
and I think,
yeah.
sorry to cut you off. I just wanted to say I do think that there is unfortunately a lot of pressure on people leaving high school if they're deciding to go to college or university to figure out what they want to do immediately. 'Cause I know my experience, I started out in marketing my first year of university and I liked it, but it wasn't exactly what I wanted to do. So I was grateful enough to be at a liberal arts university, so I was able to take a wide range of classes to see like what fit with me the most, and psychology did, and I am very grateful that I had that opportunity to explore the different avenues in order to figure out that I wanted to go into sports psychology.
Yeah, and I know that oh, sorry to cut you off.
Very good.
Okay. Yeah, I know that a lot of universities nowadays, like just from seeing other orientations and all, have been focusing more on exploratory like studies. I think UNC Greensboro has a whole degree, and this might even be at NC State, where you can focus on just figuring out what you want to do for your first year. But my only contempt with that is I think that's something that would be much better incorporated way earlier on at like the high school level before you get to the point where you've already decided a school and then you have to figure out what you want to do. So I think taking programs like that, it might be even more beneficial for like the freshman year of high school to be focused on just completely figuring it out. And that would just be one idea.
I
And I don't
think
know
there's so much
then
I think there's so much pressure on all kids. All even I mean, I see what's going on even in like elementary school. The amount of homework or the pressure or the testing is so much pressure. And then I know, like, and maybe you all can speak to some of this, but the pressure in general to perform, the competition is early, young, and like my grandson plays hockey. Um, he loves it, but there's a lot of competition in that too, and he's 11. So what are you? I know that there's competition in the education area, there's competition in sports. What are we doing here, and what can we do better?
well, I think from a competition standpoint and figuring out how to overcome that sort of pressure, that is still like a very hard question to figure out because on one hand, it also depends heavily on what the goal of the actual person is in their life. Some people are very content with living not I don't like to use the word average because it depends on what you get the most fulfillment out of, but living like a life where they don't really have to be the best at anything. They just have to be focused on things that they enjoy. And then when you compare that to someone who's really competitive and always wants to win, the pressure differences really lie there. But I know Danielle brought up something like the ACT and SAT, which I also have experiences with. And I do think that those tests specifically are just unjustified in the amount of pressure for what they assess. Because I think in our current like age, assessing things from that perspective isn't just that important anymore. And I know Danielle, you said you had some thoughts on like the testing based assessment. So did you want to elaborate a little bit on that?
Yeah, absolutely. So when I was in high school and I was taking standardized tests to enter college, I our school supported one test for the ACT, so they had it fully paid for, and I took that one time. As for the SAT, my parents were graciously able to support paying for that test, so I took it one time, and I wasn't satisfied with the score because I was applying to a lot of higher level universities where their average SAT score was higher than mine. So I was able to get an SAT prep book. I was able to be tutored by someone, and I studied for quite a few months and took the test again. I want to say probably 4 to 5 months later, and my score was exactly the same. And I was very frustrated because I was thinking, wow, I put all this time and effort, and my parents were able to pay for a book for me to test, and they were able to pay for a tutor for a few times for me to try to focus on the areas where I needed improvement, but I didn't do any better. And I was surrounded by a lot of very high achieving students. A lot of my peers had started taking this test when they were even freshmen, sophomores in high school, and had said, "Oh, yeah, I've taken this test 5 or 6 times now, and I know exactly how to time it. I know exactly how many minutes I need to spend on this one section. I know I'm not going to do too well in this section, so I'll focus on another section." And they were professionals. They were spending, I think it's 4 hours total. You can correct me if I'm wrong, Josh, on whatever day that test was, where you sit down, and I think they allow you a few breaks to during the test, and um, that exam will determine for a large part of if you are admitted to a university or not. And I remember thinking in high school, it for me, it really felt like a money grab by the college board, where they're saying, "All right, well, if you don't do so well as you need to do in order to get into the university, we'll help you. You can pay for a book that we put out, and you can pay for systems that we've put out online where you can do practice tests and you can improve. And you can pay us again in order to take the exam to get into your university you want to get into." So I felt like it was very much it was in no way benefiting me to spend hours of my time studying for something when I could be doing something where that actually brought me joy and fulfillment. I was very involved in high school with volunteering with my local soccer club and volunteering in this club that I had started about upcycling. And there were a lot of things that I could be doing in places that brought me fulfillment, and also I felt were improving other people's lives instead of focusing all of my time on this one exam. So I think that the pressure to perform well on that is honestly ridiculous. I think that if we want to continue to have standardized testing as an element that allows you to get into college, it shouldn't be something that'll harm or hurt you. It should be something that a university could look at and go, "Okay, so they perform well in these aspects in a standardized test, but I'm going to look at what they did over 4 whole years of their career and use that as more of a determinant of in their essays and who they are as a person and an individual, rather than a number that they have and assigning a number and a numerical value to someone and getting into a college." So I think that's probably my biggest gripe with standardized testing, is I feel like by assigning a value number to an individual is taking away their individuality and who they are as a person, and what they can contribute to a college campus as a person with a personality rather than a number on a piece of paper.
Yeah, I absolutely agree with what you said. In my experiences, like I haven't taken the actual SAT yet, but preparing for different like PSAT exams and all, even with the amount of work and intelligence you can put in, there's always some level of luck with it too. Like I've even taken PSATs where I just thought this one was just a lot easier than the other ones that I'd taken prior because of whatever reasons. And I do think colleges are definitely making the shift now to take more of a look at people's like extracurriculars and what people do outside of school. But I do feel that it's not being looked at enough to the point where it incentivizes you or it lets you figure out, should I be focusing all my time on these leadership roles or club roles, or should I be focusing more time on GPA? Like even prioritizing those two things is really challenging. So this is really directed to both you and Rebecca, but what do you think in a college is actually important for them to get out of a student? Because I know with all these selective processes for highly esteemed universities, what's the goal for the college? Would it be like just creating students that end up doing a lot of really good things outside of their college career? Like, what would their goal be that would guide them to decide how they choose that selection?
Well, this is just my opinion, but my hope is that these universities and colleges are selecting people that they think will fit well in their university or college, and not just the the person that got the highest GPA or the highest ACT or SAT. I'd hope that they're looking at those extracurricular activities and those leadership roles to see what has this person done over high school, middle school, to grow as a person, because that's in my opinion, I think that makes a more well-rounded person than just someone that was only focused on their grades.
Yeah, and I
What
mean,
about
at
you?
that extent, it almost feels like your essay questions. should have a much more profound impact than even most of like your stats regarding what you completed prior. But with that in mind too, when it comes to that selection process, how important would a post-secondary education necessarily be? Because I know there are the occasional CEOs here and there who talk about how they don't even regard degrees anymore because it's about like the character or knowledge or skill set of a person. Do you guys feel like college degrees and that form of education is still really essential, like in our current world going into the real world?
I think it really depends on the field. Because I know in psychology, in order to get a PhD, you need to have done your bachelor's, you need to have had your master's, and go all the way to a PhD. But it's really dependent on what avenue you want to go down in terms of your career path. Because if, say, you're focused in some a science like biology, you might need to go on to a PhD. But for um, other fields, you might not need as much schooling. So a bachelor's is what all you would need, or some you just go right out of high school. So I think it's really dependent on where you want your career to go. But I do think um, like higher levels of education does open more doors for you in terms of a career, which is why, at least for me, that's why I want to pursue a master's degree and then go on to a PhD because I want to practice sports psychology, which does require a PhD.
Yeah, and Danielle, I don't know if you agree with that point.
I think Rebecca is correct in saying that there are a lot of specific fields, especially within medical careers specifically and law degrees, where you do need to go to school because the things that you are learning are going to save someone's life or are going to make someone's life better. And there's certain things and knowledge that you have to have in order to be successful at your career. But I certainly believe that a lot of things that do currently require college degrees should not require college degrees. I think that evaluating somebody's competency on their level of education is really taking away from a large group of people, population of people who might have, instead of completing their college career, maybe they dropped out in order to pursue some other passion of theirs or something they're really good at. And just saying that you need a college degree in order to do something, I think is very black and white when there is so much nuance that should be considered when you're looking for someone to work for you as an employee.
I love this direction. I have to say, I find it very interesting, and I think there's a lot to explore with what you're all talking about as far as what's the alternative? Like, how do you get the experience? And and earlier, you were talking about, education, and you're not just numbers. Well, when you do a resume, it doesn't it also doesn't have the dimension that I think we're looking for when we're talking about people. I think we need to take a look at a lot of different systems and things that we do in general, and looking at how are we getting to know people? How are we giving people the benefit of some doubt, or the disparity? You mentioned your parents could buy you the book. Your parents can do My parents could do that too. What about parents who couldn't? What happens then? And what are the options? I mean, they say, well, a college degree isn't even enough anymore. That's the old high school degree. Now you need a master's, or you need your doctorate, or you need something. So talk about that, because there's a lot, I'm sure. And now is a really interesting time because, people are transitioning.
Yeah, I think that identifying the hardest part about all this is while I can list like all of my points of content with something like this, I myself can't propose an ideal solution. And while I do fundamentally believe work-based learning is definitely something that is far more beneficial, obviously it depends on the field, but one big issue with education, I think throughout all like age levels and learning levels is that you really just don't remember everything that your education says you're qualified for. Even if you take certifications to like say that you know how to do something, a majority of those skills will be forgotten if you're not continuously practicing it. So at that point, I would just say maybe the best way to do it is to work-based learning opportunities, which I know a lot of universities do with even things like, if you're a Spanish minor or major, you can go to a foreign country to really practice on like learning and understanding the culture and language. So I know universities definitely partake in doing stuff like that. But at that point, breaks into the question of in our more modern day, should universities just almost be like an organization that's facilitating your journey into learning how to work into a specific field? And that's where it's still tough for me because it can't be like such a straight line game anymore about just like complete this education, and then gain this reward. Because there are even kids out there that are already making millions of dollars. And if you're like monetarily focused, at that point, why are you going through all this extra work? And that's when it gets into different ideas of, is it like a risk insurance, or should you just completely focus on only learning how to become like those kids? So I don't have too many other thoughts on that subject, but if either of you guys have any ideas for what like alternatives could be to fix these issues, I'd definitely love to hear it.
Josh, do you feel confused by all the things that are in front of you?
Yeah,
Opportunities,
absolutely.
which college, what subject, which this, which that. Do you have confusion?
Yeah, I mean, for me, I still haven't figured out what I want to do when I grow up, because a big point or issue that I also find is that I think people overrate the word passion. And this could just come from my inexperience or lack of maturity. But I think saying you're so passionate about something, like find a job where you never feel like you're working a day in your life, is almost an overstatement because that's never really how it works. Like if you have a hobby you're really, really committed to or disciplined to, like for me, let's just say it's exercising, for example. There are days where I really don't want to exercise, but the reason I can keep doing it such long term falls far more into my self discipline. So I think someone for me where my interests are really wide and like varied struggles a lot with figuring out which one of those interests counts as the passion that decides the career I want to go into. Because if I enjoy doing theater or acting on a stage, or I also enjoy playing sports, between those two interests, how do I decide which one is the right one? It's almost like a relationship in a way too, like figuring out like the right significant other. There's so many pros here, but then cons here, and it's so hard to evaluate it.
Do you
So
have to make those choices? I mean, I guess maybe Danielle and Rebecca can share about advice on making those choices and how do you make those choices? And do you have to make a choice or can you do it all?
I so I experienced a very similar thing in high school, and I'm curious to know how it works at Josh's school, because the way it worked at my school was we had our different courses weighed differently. So if we were to take an AP, which is an advanced placement course, which some high schools also have IB, and I'm not entirely sure what IB stands for, but it's sort of the same concept as an advanced placement course where you're taking a course for college credit in high school. And that weighed higher, so, like, maybe it's on a 5-point scale than an honors course that was also offered that might have weighed maybe a 4.5 to a standard course, which was typically, like, maybe a 4.0 or something. And all of that factored into your GPA, which then determined whether or not you were qualified to enter into certain universities. And where I have such a huge problem with this is the courses that were weighed higher, which are courses that would contribute to your GPA, make it stronger so you could get into certain universities, were typically your core classes of math, science, language, and history. Where courses that are, as Josh was describing, as something that could be your passion, like theater, for example, were typically only offered as standard courses. So they would weigh less than some of the other classes. And as somebody who was a very competitive student in high school, I felt as though I could not take some of these courses like theater, which I really wanted to take, or a chorus class because it was going to hurt my GPA and I wouldn't be able to get into college for trying to find something that I'm passionate about. Even if it's not something I followed for my career, but it was something that added fulfillment to my life and made me feel happier or healthier in some way, I didn't felt like I couldn't pursue that because it was going to harm my GPA. So I remember making the decision my junior year of high school to take an advanced placement economics class, micro and macroeconomics. And when I tell you I have absolutely zero interest in economics, I didn't have an interest. I got into the class, absolutely hated it, but it did take two it counted as two advanced placement classes that I could gain in 1 year. So to me, that was an academic advantage over taking something like theater, which I finally had time for in my schedule to take. So instead of doing something that would have brought me some kind of joy, or maybe it would have been something I continued to do into college if I liked it, I chose to take something that was going to put me in a higher placement among my peers. And I don't know if you all have similar experiences to that, or you yourselves were competitive students in high school or felt the pressure to achieve a certain level. But I think that is such a huge problem that both arts and harder academics or core courses are counted within the same GPA, because it really discourages students from branching out and finding things they're actually interested in if they do want to get into a competitive university.
Yeah, so addressing like a lot of those points, my school functions the exact same way you described it, where we have like the 4 to 5 like GPA system with standards all the way up to advanced placement classes. And something my school's improved on doing is they have a lot of higher level classes now that you can do to get all the way up to advanced placement for computer science or even like drama or chorus or things of that nature. But it does still like hinder a competitive student heavily, especially if they're focused on their class rank, because the amount of prerequisite courses you have to take, and they're all like academics or basic level courses, just to get to like finally taking one of those advanced placement classes in senior year just doesn't compare to just taking advanced placement classes every year. And obviously it varies between how competitive you are. Some of my friends at school, they're just trying to do whatever classes they enjoy because they really don't care about like post-secondary education. So for a competitive student like me, class registration can be such an like important time to choose the exact right classes to maximize my GPA. While for other kids I know and friends of mine, they just click whatever class sounds interesting to them. So between those two philosophies, it's really hard to dictate which one of those is the correct way to go about it. Because on one hand, universities might be deterred by that whole like passion exploring route, but if you're a failing student with a thriving business on something you love, it's really hard to dictate if at that point were you really wrong by choosing like a certain decision. So with all that risk in mind, I do believe mindset on how risky you want to be matters heavily. But I also think it's really hard to use the word passion nowadays, because asking a student to figure out what they absolutely want to do going into like after school can is also really challenging assertion to make. So I don't know if you guys have any extra opinions regarding something like that, but I guess my question off of that would be, how do you decide if it's the right career to go into? Like, since both of you are now like graduating university students, do you guys think you figured out yet what you want to do? Or if you did, how do you kind of like came to that conclusion?
I mean, I hope I'm choosing the quote unquote right one, but I don't think you'll ever really know if it's the correct choice until you're like further down the line. But I'm just going with um, what my interest is right now, and that's like the most informed decision I can make at this present time. I'm deciding to pursue sports psychology because of my background as a competitive figure skater, especially in the realm of injury rehabilitation. And right now, that's my present interest. Could that change in the future? Sure. I will make my adjustments as needed, but that's the decision that I'm sticking with right now. And if it changes in the future, so be it.
Do
Yeah,
you
and
feel, I have to interrupt you a second. Do you feel that you can make a choice and then you can change your choice? How do you feel about choices? Do you feel like a choice is etched in stone, or that you can be flexible?
I
I think
don't
that
think that all choices are necessarily set in stone, especially with career paths. Of course, there's more permanent choices that you make over the course of your life. But I think with career, it can be flexible for sure.
I definitely agree with Rebecca, but I think that the way our school system presents these choices to us kind of feels in a way that you're sort of writing your name in blood when you're selecting certain things. For example, your major or what your first job out of college is. I've personally felt a lot of pressure of choosing the, in quotations, the right thing to do. And in thinking that if I don't choose the next right step, then my future could be completely thrown off and I'm throwing my whole life away doing something, which I certainly don't believe to be true. But I think that there's a lot of pressure in feeling like there is a right decision, this sort of anonymous right decision that exists somewhere. And you're having to sort of figure out by trial and error what that is. So, as somebody who's graduating and not going directly into a master's program, I made the decision to take a year or two off and work and sort of try to explore what the right choice might be for me next. So, to Josh's point about figuring out your passion, I think the best advice I've ever gotten in college is, and although this isn't really mathematically true, um, the advice was at a freshman orientation that there are no straight lines in the universe, which, mathematically that's not exactly true. But it really put a lot of things into perspective, thinking, although we're sort of presented with this idea that we're going to go straight from high school, straight to college, and then you somehow miraculously find your passion in college, and then you find a master's program, and if you decide to go farther, go to a PhD, and then you have your whole life set out in front of you, is very real for some people, but for a lot of people like myself, it's just not the case. And as much as I would love to have discovered my passion in college and to have decided, I know this is exactly what I want to do and I'm going to pursue it, I'm excited for the opportunity to continue to figure out what that is. And it is honestly really scary because I don't have, for the first time, I don't have a path put out in front of me. I don't have a next step that is in some capacity predetermined. I'm actively making decisions and choices that are going to shape my future. And the more professionals I speak to who are either professors or doctors or have earned their doctorate or are doing something that they are genuinely feel are passionate about, had said things to me like, well, Danielle, when I graduated college, I was bartending for 3 years. And then I decided I don't want to do this anymore. So I went back to school. Or I was a substitute teacher for a year and I learned that I love to teach. And so I went back to school and got a master's in education. And now I'm a professor at a university. And they all say they just kind of were figuring it out along the way. And there wasn't one right answer for them. There were multiple right answers and there are multiple opportunities. And there are many people who entered their lives and have said, hey, why don't you try this? Or have you ever heard of this certain thing? My own mother said that she was at a Christmas party that she got dragged to by her mother, where someone spoke to her and said, hey, have you ever heard about this career field? She said, I've never heard about it in my life. And then she went back and she got a master's in that field. And now she runs her own business. So much of it is really not a straight line. There's really not one right answer. And as someone who's aware of that, it still doesn't make it any less scary. I mean, I'm pretty scared out of my mind, if I'm being completely honest, of going out and throwing myself out into the real world and having to start on my first job outside of college and to really figure things out for myself. But that's the reality of post college after
Danielle,
college.
thanks for being so honest.
Yeah, of course.
Because if we have an opportunity with this group right here to be honest and to discover things for yourselves and to help other people discover things. I mean, I'm listening to you and I'm like, I'm still growing up. I'm still figuring it out. I still sometimes go to bed at night and I'm like, I'm worried, or I'm concerned, or what choice am I making, or what? So we all have that. Now, maybe I have a little more experience. Maybe I have fallen more times than you have and gotten up. But I love this opportunity because we get to help each other. And and I think that that's so valuable. And it is scary. It isn't easy. But no, I don't think too many choices that you have to make have to be etched in stone. I think you can make some. I think any opportunity you have to explore now, explore to your heart's content. Because now is a great, now you're going to, and let me tell you what, if you think it's the only time you're going to explore, you're not. This is a great time to explore. So is it when you're like 30. So is it when you're 40, when you're 50. I don't think you ever get done exploring, or hopefully you won't. Yeah. So, Rebecca, what do you think?
Yeah, I definitely agree that your like early 20s is not just the only time that you're going to be exploring what you want to do, what interests you, what a new hobby that you want to pick up. Um, that's something that while it is very terrifying to like have to make those decisions, it also gives me some comfort knowing that if something changes in the future, I'll just have to deal with it when it comes up, but I can't worry about it too much now because then that'll send me into a whole other thought spiral. So I think it's just important to remember that instead of being etched in stone, it's more written in sand at this point.
Yeah, and I think something I also wanted to add addressing like Danielle's point too about the whole straight line. One thing that makes it hard for kids now is when you have to think about knowing, because this is like a little like anecdote that I always think of in my head. Imagine if you put in all of this work, like you really think you can only succeed if you get this career or this job, and you put in all this work to go into that career, and then the next day out of nowhere, somebody just decides to offer you like $1 million paying job for something completely different. Then how do you define if all that work leading up to that point was irrelevant? Because obviously at that point it gets back into that whole risk-based insurance because the chances of that scenario happening are so little. But since we already know that so much can happen that's like unpredictable, what's I think I just like to self-reflect on what skills should kids try to cultivate throughout their educational years. Since people still bring up, even among like colleges and all that, while GPA isn't necessarily an indicator of intelligence, it is an indicator of their somebody's ability to like grit and like figure things out to figure out how to perform. So, in addressing that point too, do you guys have any ideas on what skills do you think are universal skills that people and adolescents should focus on cultivating, whether or not they're in school or have an education?
I absolutely think that if I could say for anyone to focus at any point in their life, but specifically college, on learning a skill from their education, it would it would 100% be perspective and understanding that what's right in front of you right now will not and does not define who you are or where you are, and you're not stuck by any means in that situation. And I think a lot of very competitive students specifically really struggle with that. And I'm speaking from my own experience, especially in high school, and feeling like if I don't achieve a certain grade on a certain class, then my life is over because I will not be a certain rank and get into a certain university. That's really not the case. There are very few things, and I firmly believe this, and this is especially for younger adults and for students. There are very few things that you can do right now that will royally screw up your life. There are plenty of things in that realm that you could do. You could get into a lot of trouble with the law. You could get into a lot of trouble doing a lot of things you're not supposed to be doing. But granted that you are really trying and putting forth your best effort in everything you do, and you're doing things with a good heart and with good intention, there are very few things you can do right now that are going to mess up your life. And I firmly believe that. And I think that having that perspective and understanding that has helped me tremendously through my college years, and knowing that I'm as long as I'm trying and I'm putting forth my best effort, then things are going to be okay. On the in the grand scheme of things, on the grand scale of life, it's gonna be okay.
Yeah, and I don't know, Rebecca, if you had anything to add on to that point.
Yeah, I definitely agree with what Danielle is saying in terms of perspective because I had a similar mindset in high school where I had to always get A's. If I got a B, it was the end of the world. But I think university has taught me that there's much bigger things than just grades and being able to like look past the occasional like be on one test of one course over the 4 years of university isn't going to destroy your future career. So I think definitely perspective is an important ability to develop, but also just the ability to be adaptive to whatever situations are thrown at you is invaluable, in my opinion, because that's inevitable in life. Not everything's going to be perfectly on the straight path. Some of the things are going to be thrown at you, like whether it be family things, health emergencies, all those kinds of things. You're just going to have to learn to um, go with the punches.
Yeah, so actually, when you brought up adaptability, I guess to rewind it back all to the initial point, that also makes me kind of contemplate what could schools or education do to increase a student's abilities to understand perspective and understand adaptability. Because I mean, I feel bad asking the question because I myself can't like entirely think of a response I would give. So I don't want to put any of you guys on the spot. But in terms of like all of this adaptability stuff, does it come down to another solution where we take something like classes, for example, and instead of like one core class being required, alternate and change it to something more exploratory based or something of that nature? So I definitely like to hear if you guys have any opinions on it, but also understand if that's kind of like a harder question to answer.
Well, I think that's a great question. And if you all are unfamiliar with this concept in public education for grades K through 12, there's something called social emotional learning. And that's the idea that instead of teaching kids solely about academics, there's also an element of teaching kids how to be good citizens and to cultivate good relationships and to understand themselves as individuals and for them to gain some sort of value. So I would love to see a focus on integrating more social emotional learning curriculum into schools at younger ages because that gives these students, sorry about that, I'm sitting in the vicinity of a road. Um, it gives students that perspective at a very young age that although they are taught all of these things and all of these concepts, that does not define them as an individual. And really, the most important things that they could be doing at that age and at any age really is valuing themselves as an individual and cultivating good and meaningful relationships with other people. So there are some states, and I'm not up to date on the policy of all of this, but there are some states that do require social emotional learning in public schools. So there has to be some sort of element, and a lot of times it's some sort of third party curriculum that the school or the district can purchase and integrate into the schools for anywhere between like 15 minutes, 30 minutes, something along those lines. I think it varies depending on which area of the states that you're in, but it teaches kids during the school day about these really important elements of just being a human and giving them a common vocabulary to discuss with their friends um, and build their character. So I think that I don't want to say that is a solution because I really think that there's so many different ways of going about this, but I think that it would be an element that would really improve the quality of life of a lot of young people's age of a lot of young people, and also I think improve the transition from middle school to high school to college in terms of an individual's mental health.
I think that's a great idea. And I think that that's the issue that we're having now is the is emotional learning. Too many people assume the emotion and not experience the emotion. And an emotion coming out of the heart is the emotion. The emotion coming out of the head ain't the real feeling emotion. I mean, I think that's a big problem with what's going on in our world today. People aren't connecting. We need emotion. We need to know how we feel. We need to be able to express ourselves. And the more we can connect and understand our emotion, of course, the healthier we're going to be, the more open minded we're going to be, the more of an invitation. Like if when I'm emotionally comfortable and secure, then I'm okay with you being better than me, or you knowing more than me, or you having different experiences than me. I don't have to be tit for tat. That is so important. I mean, I can be okay in my skin, and I'm okay if I'm even a little bit invisible because maybe I want to be. So that's a really good point, honey.
Yeah, and actually, I really feel compelled to say this now to address your point, Danielle. The one thing where I get like a little worried about incorporating something like that into the education system is that I feel like as a whole system in society, we still haven't figured out how you go about doing something like that. So to put it into perspective, when I was in elementary school, we actually had I don't even remember the name. I think it was called the Positivity Project, but it was some sort of course thing incorporated where like once a week we would have a 30-minute class period session where we had to learn about a different fundamental character trait like trust or like love or things like that. And the biggest issue with it is with all of these learning styles, they end up turning into the same formulaic, we either watch videos or complete worksheets, to the point where something as deep and convoluted as like emotions and social learning, it just to old kids naturally gravitate towards figuring it out like the same game all their other classes are. Like biology for me isn't really about learning the biology as much as it's about just knowing what I need to know for the test. And then once it becomes as complex as explaining on a worksheet, or answering on a test, like it's hard for us to really assess past that point. How do we teach people about this? I think the process is still flawed. Even going back to learning like real world skills too on that point, I actually took a class in 8th grade where it was completely about just learning how to be more like compatible as a person. And it was a home ec class where you learn about how to write a check, how to cook basic meals, how to like design like interior apparel, financing. It was split up into all these different units. And I have to thank it for like our cooking, for example. I actually learned genuine hands-on cooking and it helped me learn how to do real cooking. But even something like writing a check in that class, I forgot how to do because at the end of the day, it became I have to remember the labels for each part of the check. And then on a test, I have to fill out what the name of each part of a check is. And that form of learning, I think, is still flawed, where even if school was to focus on teaching us real world skills, it wouldn't do an effective job. So to wind it all back to like the social and emotional learning, I still, I guess I would want to ask, how would we incorporate that so that kids can truly learn from it? Especially when it comes to assessing, we fall back on the same model of just memorize certain information and see if it benefits you.
You are so, so absolutely correct. And I think that that points to the system, like the capital S system in general, and how our public education system currently is structured. And that when you try to integrate something that could potentially be helpful or something that's beyond just academic education, we do fall back on the same techniques of teaching and or PowerPoints or videos and I think that there and I know currently that there is a lot of research going on social emotional learning and conducting these research studies in schools and seeing if students are really genuinely benefiting from how they're structured and from different ways and across different platforms of social emotional learning and seeing what is actually the most effective. And it's such a difficult thing to do because the term social and emotional, aside from the learning part, those are often really abstract concepts and they're really hard to make quantitative data. So you're dealing with a lot of qualitative data, which is just oftentimes a lot of more abstract or anecdotal types of data, which it's hard to measure on a scale how effective something is in that way. So I think that you're completely right in saying that the way that some organizations could be going about implementing social emotional learning is sort of the same as a same old problem that we have with the education system in general. And I think any solution, if there is to be a solution, is just it's really going to be research. And it's going to be learning how and what is the most effective way to teach these kids and how these different companies and organizations can go about implementing it in a way that's actually effective.
Yeah, and Rebecca, if you had anything you wanted to add on that too, if you're listening.
Yeah, I think it will unfortunately be a while till there are concrete solutions to these problems because unfortunately research like this does take time to conduct. And I think the results that they'll have in the future will be invaluable just because coming back to adaptability, if kids are able to learn these socio-emotional skills earlier on in life, they'll be better able to cope with the situations that they find themselves in high school and university or the workforce. So they're better able to handle those situations and not let it impact their mental health, for example, as heavily as it if they didn't have those developed skills already. So I think the solutions do need to be there, but I think it will unfortunately be a while until we get there.
There is in some of the work that I do, we have peer supports, and they are people who are peers. And there's agencies that I've worked with, and everyone is a peer support. Everyone has a similar experience, and they help each other, with their counseling, therapy, whatever their needs are. It could be where someday down the road, there are students who are peer supports, who are maybe it's an upperclassman, working with the mentors and things like that, but focusing on the social and the emotional, where it's acceptable and it is an established program as opposed to just one that we just think about. But I think, like all of you right now, you're all supporting each other in this work, and we need more of yous out there, to support and to have, the dialogue. And you're right. I mean, we would be a lot better adults if we had that.
Yeah, and I mean, even addressing points about solving the situation through research and all, it's definitely hard to address things that way because with humans, one of the most like irritating or like fascinating perspectives on everything is nothing is constant among anybody and everything only like works until it doesn't. I was even reading like a book about investing, and the author of that book also wrote that it was so frustrating because with like the stock market, all of the rules are that this, and this always happens unless it doesn't happen. So even research can't really assess to that extent how like each individual person, which I guess in my mind then the solution is that people really need to do experiences throughout adolescence and growing up that cause them to look introspective, and to do that they need to like focus on more experiential work and learning. So I think a big thing that could be incorporated like as we get into the more like closure session of this would be giving students more opportunities to really go through with an experience and also explain to them why they need to do it. Because at the end of the day, I mean, even a science lab, once that science lab becomes about filling out like a worksheet at the end, it takes out the real like fun of figuring out why exactly the thing that you're learning about works. So I know we only have about 2 minutes left. So Rebecca and Danielle, if you had any like closing thoughts you wanted to bring up.
Yeah, I definitely think there is a more of a lean towards experiential learning that's happening in university. I know for me, my health psychology class, we had the opportunity to go to a rehabilitation center in Montreal, and that taught me way more than the textbooks that we had been using that semester. So I think that the more experiential learning that can happen in university and high school, it'll just have a overall benefit on the student.
I completely agree. And I think the more opportunity that we give students to focus and channel their energy on learning more about life, learning more about themselves, learning more about other people, and less worried about how well they perform, I think that's when we'll start to move in a better direction as a society and as an education system as a whole.
And I would like to add one thing to which all of you, before you say anything, Josh. I think you also, we all got to get better at asking for what we want. Because the program doesn't exist, or the class doesn't exist, or the project doesn't exist, or whatever doesn't exist, go ask. I mean, how many times, even, I mean, the three of you, have you actually like taken on something completely different than what was expected? Because you made it work, you asked. And we can do that. I think we need to do that more and more. So that's my 2 cents.
Yeah, and then to wrap everything up, I absolutely agree with what you said, Marilyn. I also definitely think people need to realize that people are a lot more receptive than you might expect to brand new ideas if it's really going to make a change, especially in school environments. So, I guess to finish things off, I believe that going forward, experiential learning is more important to give people insight on their selves. And in terms of figuring out how we incorporate that, that's just something I also need to take some time to think about. So, unless anyone else has anything else to say, I'm good. And that's my wrapping up, finishing thoughts.
Sounds perfect. So we'll be here next month, second Monday in June. I don't know what day that is, but it's the second Monday in June. 6 o'clock, we go live. If you have an idea for a show or you'd like to be part of our show, and please write to me at marilynshannon.com, and we would love to include you. And with that, anybody have a final word? Rebecca, Danielle, Josh, anyone? Final word? Anybody about anything? No, no. All right, everyone. Thanks. See you soon.
You are tuned to the Nissan Communications Network. If you tuned in too late, you can always watch each program in its entirety or download an MP3 audio file of it in the archives section at nissancommunications.com. Don't forget to subscribe to our YouTube channel, follow us on Twitter, and like us on Facebook. Sponsored by StreamingGear.com, Carolina Apparel, and DeltaForce.net.